Well done. That was great. If you would open your Bibles to Genesis 39, that's where we are going to be camping out this morning. We're gonna read through it kind of as we go through. So just keep it open. Some of the words will be on screen, but if you've got a physical Bible or an electronic Bible, go for that. But would you just join me in praying? Holy Spirit, we ask that you would speak this morning. God, that it would be your words in our hearts, maybe my words in our ears, but Lord, your words in our hearts. Would you highlight that which is needed for us to be edified, to be built up, to be trained, to be made more and more into the likeness of Jesus Christ. God, would you have your way? Would your will be done this morning? In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Now, I just want to ask you just a little internal survey. You don't actually have to say, but just if you were to pay for a cheeseburger, what would you expect to get? Yeah. If you go to sleep early, unlike last night for me, how would you expect to feel in the morning? Good. On fire. Now, in your work, if you work in your job and payday comes around, what do you expect to be in your bank account? Now, if you're kind to someone, how do you expect them to then treat you? Kind. See, now, the reason I'm asking you to do this little internal survey is because I want to highlight something from you. I mean, your expectations are not unreasonable, but I want to highlight how we have been formed by the society around us into transactional beings. Where if I pay for a cheeseburger, I expect a cheeseburger, maybe a little bit extra if they're kind. If I go to sleep early, I expect to wake up and be refreshed in the morning. If I work, I expect to be paid. And if I'm kind to you, well, I really hope and kind of expect that you'll be kind to me. And it's fair enough, right? Fair enough that we would expect that. So I just want us to hold that in our minds as we jump over Genesis 38. So we looked at Genesis 37 last week. Then Genesis 38, we are going to touch on that. It's looking at Judah, and that will come later in the series. But we're going to continue our story with Joseph in Genesis 39. And one of the things that I want you to really notice is that how it begins and how it ends. And it begins with this line, God, or at the start and at the end, it has this line, God was with Joseph. God was with Joseph. Now, if I say that, what do you expect? Ignore what you know. What do you expect Joseph's situation to be? What do you expect his life to be like? God is with him. Perhaps it's easier to think on your own life. Now, if you reflect on your own life, when would you say that God was with you? What are the times in your life where you would say, God was with me in that moment? Now think about why. Now, are there times in your life when you would actually think, God wasn't with me? Again, why? Why? What is the reasoning behind the stories and the memories that come to mind? If we were to describe a person's life and situation with the words, the Lord was with them, I think for many of us, or at least often for me, it means that I think that their life is a blessed life. It's a good life. They've got what they're seeking after. Things are going good for them. They've got the house. They've got the car. They've got the marriage. They've got all the things that we say are the New Zealand, the Australian, the American dream. Because God is with them, right? And yet, knowing what we know about Joseph's story, just from one chapter, from chapter 37, we start this chapter with God was with Joseph, and yet, how would you describe Joseph's life? This 17-year-old boy who's just starting to get whiskers like me, but who was despised by his siblings, So much so that they plotted against him, they beat him, they threw him into a well, they imprisoned him, and then they sold their brother Joseph into slavery to be led off to a foreign land. Is this a story that you would describe as one where God is with him? If not, and I certainly wouldn't be the first to say this, because I think it speaks to a theology that I've heard spoken, that I've spoken, that when good things happen, or at least when things turn out the way that I think they should, God is with me. In fact, he's come through for me. But when bad things happen, when what we think should happen doesn't happen, God hasn't come through for me. In fact, is he even with me? Have you abandoned me, God? My prayer is that this morning's passage will challenge you, as it has massively challenged me over this last week. To stop thinking that the blessings of God are contingent on his presence. And so our worship to God is contingent on the blessings of Jesus. Let's jump back into the story, and to help me do this, I'm going to ask Luke to read throughout. Luke, would you read verses 1 and 2?
Now Joseph has been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, has brought him from the Ishmaelites who brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master.
So Joseph is now a household slave to this higher up official named Potiphar. And we read immediately in verse 2 these words, that the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Now some of you will have an understanding of the health, wealth, and prosperity doctrine. Yeah. It doesn't line up with the story of Joseph. I can tell you that. It tells us he prospered. And so immediately, if you're coming at this new and fresh, if you've never read this personally, I would think, okay, so he was set free. He was given wealth. The wrongs were righted. Justice was sorted, and he sails off into the sunset. But that's not what happens. No, Joseph remained a slave. Joseph was not given justice. And yet we read that the Lord was with Joseph. Does the story of Joseph challenge your concept of what it means for God to be with you in life? I don't know what's going on in your life now. I know what's going on in a few of your lives. And I know that in these difficult, trying, hard times, it can feel like the furthest thing from the truth is that God is with you in this moment. Luke, would you read on in verse 3?
His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and he attended him. And he made him overseer of the house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he became his overseer in his house and all of that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was in all that he had, in his house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate.
So we read on that despite the situation, the Lord was with Joseph. I'm going to keep repeating that little sentence. And he blesses him and everything he did. And so the Lord blessed the household of Potiphar. Now, a question that has bounced around in my mind this week is, how did Potiphar notice that God was with Joseph? I mean, if you're a follower of Jesus today, you're at work, you're doing a good job. I don't know about you, but when I get it a bit more now that I'm a pastor. But when I was a nurse, people didn't come up and be like, Matt, you're doing good. The Lord is with you. I mean, but it doesn't happen like that. Or would it? unless we're open about our faith and about God and about the reason we do the things that we do. We answer the why behind what we do. You see, in ancient times, most Egyptians were superstitious and they believed in a God for nearly everything. Potiphar would have had this pantheon of Egyptian gods that he worshipped, and yet Joseph didn't worship any of these gods. And still, Potiphar notices that he's having success in everything he does. And so this leads me to believe that there was a conversation or some kind of interaction between Joseph and Potiphar. Matt, you're going beyond the text, mate. Yes. But how does Potiphar know? And I think it's inevitable. Think about your own lives when you do certain things and when certain things happen in your life and people ask you. We're told to be prepared to give an answer for every situation, right? And I think that that's what happens here, that as Joseph succeeds, an interaction happens and Joseph tells Potiphar about Yahweh, about the God that he serves, about the God that he is faithful to, about the God that he believes is with him even now in slavery. And I was so challenged on this because as I reflected on how I live, even as a pastor, do people ask me, does it spark some curiosity in their lives as to why I do what I do? Does it challenge them in the way that they're living? I think often there's a temptation, actually, though, when someone's in an unknown situation, when you're in an unfamiliar environment and with unknown people, and you just want to avoid standing out. Perhaps you want to fit in. You want to be liked. Is that so bad? But what's the temptation in that situation? The temptation is imitation. The temptation is to imitate those around you. But what if imitating those around you means compromising your values and beliefs? See, as I grew up, I grew up for those that don't know me, I grew up in a Christian family. My parents were missionaries in Indonesia. They had taught me, they had taken me to church. I knew of God. I claimed to follow Jesus. And yet, when I was in my teens, I found myself in a group, in a position, in a new context, with new friends, and I was presented with decisions. Decisions of whether I would compromise on my values and beliefs that I'd been raised up with so that I would fit in. That I would compromise values and beliefs that I claim to hold myself. In those moments of peer pressure, in those moments of temptation, do you know what I did? I compromised. I took what felt like the easy path, the wide path, the path that everyone else was taking. It made sense. It would mean I'd have friends. It would mean that I'd fit in. It would mean that I'd be cool. Saying no, holding true to what I believed and what I claimed to be my identity was too hard. Yet we read Joseph was presented with an opportunity and temptation that if I had been him, I would have taken. It would have been easy. Forget Yahweh and fit in. Worship the other gods. Do what the others are doing, and maybe things would be easier for you. But we read that Joseph was steadfast. He was bold and courageous. He was a slave, and yet did not compromise. And God blessed him, and he blessed those around him. I want you to cast your mind back, because I think this is what the author is doing. He wants us to think about the mandate, the promise to Abraham in Genesis 12, that he will be a blessing to others, that he will bless the nations through him. This is what Joseph is achieving in slavery, where God blesses him and he blesses other people. This is what it means to be a follower of Jesus, where as we hold firm to what God has called us to, that blessing isn't just about our happiness, In fact, sometimes our happiness may actually be put to the side so that we might bless other people. And I think this is where we have to dig deeper. Because I can see how God granting success to Joseph was a good thing for Potiphar, but we read that God was with Joseph and God blessed Joseph. One version talks about God granted Joseph success. I don't know about you, but success and slavery, they don't really compute in my mind. I don't see how they line up. Another translation actually states that Joseph was a prosperous man. So how is that possible? I think the answer becomes that Joseph's state of prosperity was not based on his external circumstances, but on his heart, on his character, on his faith in the faithfulness of God. It reminds me of the words of Paul the Apostle in Philippians. There he says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secrets of being content in any and every situation. He writes this in prison. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Amen. Joseph and Paul both inherently understood that it's not great gain that brings blessing and prosperity, but rather it's contentment that brings great gain. That's why we have to stop thinking that my worship to Jesus is contingent on my blessings from Jesus. And when we say blessings, I mean the external circumstances, the health, wealth, and prosperity. Because ultimately that just boils down to a worshiping of the gifts and not the gift giver. It's Paul again who's going to tell his young protege Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:6 that godliness with contentment is great gain. That is prosperity. Godliness with contentment is great gain. And I believe that Joseph was prosperous despite his circumstances, despite his condition, because he was content in the Lord. He was content in the faithfulness of God. In fact, his character, his contentment, his faith in the Lord made such an incredibly huge impression on Potiphar that Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. So great was Potiphar's trust in Joseph. He saw that Joseph was content. He saw that he wasn't striving, he wasn't undercutting, he wasn't lying to get ahead. No, he was a man of integrity, of character, a man of faithful loyalty to God, not to himself. And Potiphar saw that as a man that he could trust with everything. A slave that he could trust with everything. It's a situation of both and here, where the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of humanity is on display as God advances Joseph, but Joseph also postures himself in such a way that Potiphar notices and trusts everything to him. So as we review the life of Joseph, is that personal reflection that we started at the beginning continuing? How would others speak of your integrity, of your character, of your faithfulness to God? Is it what draws them to you, what creates a trust between you and them? Then we come to verse 7, where Joseph's integrity, his character, and his faithfulness is truly put to the test. Luke, would you keep reading?
Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me my master has no concern about anything in this house, and he's put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do a great wickedness and sin against God?" And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her.
So at this point, I think it's important to realize just how long Joseph has been in the household of Potiphar. So Joseph was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery. We learned that last week in chapter 37. And he's going to be 30 years old when Pharaoh promotes him, which we'll see in 41. We'll also see in chapter 41 in the next couple of weeks that Joseph spends 2 years in prison. So it makes a total time that Joseph was in the household of Potiphar around 11 years. Over a decade. Now, we don't know when Potiphar's wife showed an interest in Joseph, when that began, but we read that day after day after day, she pursued him. It's kind of like those social experiments where they get a kid in a room. There we are. And they put a marshmallow in front of them. And I watched a couple of these videos. No wonder my sermon took so long. YouTube, black hole. Anyway, but where they say, "I'm going to leave this here. Now, if you can leave it, and when I come back, if it's still there, I'll give you an extra one." Now, the results found that 2 out of 3 kids couldn't leave it. They ate it. One little girl I watched, she just kind of nibbled it. And then all that was left looked like an apple core left sitting there. And she's like... But they couldn't wait until the parent returned, until the adult returned, where they would have got more. Why? Because I think it taps into, again, something that is that we struggle with, where I want what I can see and I don't want to wait for what I can't see. Again, it's this narrative of the world that we're told, pursue happiness at all costs. Pursue fulfillment however you can. Take what you can get when you can get it, no matter the compromise, no matter the cost, no matter who it hurts, no matter the consequences. You see, Joseph had the opportunity. Potiphar trusted him with everything. And we read that Potiphar's wife emptied the household. There was no one there. This could have been their dirty little secret. No one had to know. Do you see there's a bit of I just want to tap into a progression, another little kind of hyperlink with Genesis. Because I think this is what the author wants us to do. Again, looking at the words, the progression of the words in verse 7, where Potiphar's wife, she saw that Joseph was desirable to the eye. She saw him, she liked him. The NASB writes, she had her eyes on Joseph. She saw that he was pleasing to the eye, and she sought to take him, to have him. Is this ringing any bells as you think about Genesis? Genesis 3:6, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some, ate it, and then gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. I think what we're meant to see here is this temptation, harking back to Genesis 3, and the question is meant to come up in our minds is Joseph going to respond to Potiphar's wife like Adam did to Eve? Or will he deny himself and follow God? Well, we know. Joseph fulfills the mandate originally given to Adam and Eve to rule as God's anointed people by trusting in and following the wisdom of God, by remaining faithful to God. Unlike Adam and Eve, who were surrounded by everything they could possibly want, we read that every fruit was in the garden. And yet doubted. They doubted the goodness of God, the wisdom of God, the love of God, and so sought to be independent from God. They compromised. But Joseph, again, a slave, betrayed by his brothers, exiled from his home, subservient to a master over his very own life. Yet the Lord was with Joseph. And Joseph was with God. In other words, they were faithful to one another. Joseph, a man who arguably had every reason to give into temptation and forsake God, holds firm to God. In fact, this is his main reason for denying Potiphar's wife, that it would be a sin against God. Now, I just want to kind of sit here for a second, because I think this is the thing about temptation. Satan wants us to believe that the temptation that you are facing is unique. He wants us to think that no one else like you is going through what you are going through. So surely you can just have a little bit here, just a little bit there. I mean, what's the harm? No one will know. In fact, tell you what, you deserve it. You've worked so hard. You've been so faithful. You've been so good. This is the transaction. This is what you deserve. And then when we fall into this trap, when we justify whatever we're about to do, even though we know this isn't following God, it all falls apart. Joseph had a choice. Not once, but we read day after day. Day after day, Joseph resists temptation. Now again, we need to remember that in all of this, the Lord was with Joseph, even in the temptation. But still, Joseph had a responsibility. He still had to choose whether he would be faithful to God or not. Now, some of you are probably listening to me and thinking, but Matt, the temptation feels so unbearable at times. There's no way that I can escape it. But the truth is, with every temptation, and not some, but with every temptation, God provides a way of escape. Not a metaphorical escape, a literal escape. Luke, would you read verse 11 and 12?
But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was in there, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house.
Now, this is the reality of temptation. We all, like Joseph, when faced with temptation, have the option to succumb or to run. To give in or to run as fast as you can. And Joseph ran. He didn't stop to let his eyes linger. He didn't stop to consider the pros and cons. He didn't stop to test his willpower. He realizes what's before him. He realizes it's greater than him, and he gets out of there. 2 Timothy 2:22 says, "Flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart." Now, I just want to say that maybe for some of you, you're thinking proudly, I'm not pursuing sin. I'm not running towards it. This isn't a problem for me. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps you're not running towards sin, but you're lingering in those spaces. Maybe you're messing with it. Maybe you're not fully submerged, and so you think it's not a problem. But if this beautiful building was to catch fire, you wouldn't linger. You wouldn't just sit around passively. You would look at the exit signs, which are here and here and here and here. You would look for those exit signs, and you would take it seriously, and you would do what you need to do to protect yourself, to protect your family, to protect those around you. Listen carefully. This is the same for temptations. The temptation to compromise, the temptation to just give in because it's too hard. There is always a spiritual exit sign. And I'm not saying this is the thing. It's not going to be easy. But Matt, I need my phone for work. Do you need it all the time at night when you're alone? But Matt, if I tell the truth, I might lose respect or even my position. Maybe. But Matt, if I stop, I will lose friends. Yes. Earlier when I spoke of how I compromised in my teens, it resulted in broken trust, broken relationships, particularly to those that I cared most about. But with some clarity by the Holy Spirit and by my mum, I managed to break free from those activities and that group of people that encouraged me into those unhelpful things. I moved city, but one of the things I did was I didn't return for 7 months. Because if I did, I knew I'd fall back into it. Even when I did return after 7 months, I still stumbled and then had to stay away for even longer. I had to cut it out. And it hurt. But bit by bit, it led to life. These exits in life from temptation will come at personal cost, sometimes at great personal cost. But this is where we truly determine the desires of our hearts. What is the desire of your heart? The escape is there. God provides the way of escape, but Joseph was the one who had to run through it. And that's the point of this. You have to make a choice. What will you choose? For Joseph, there was no question about it. He ran and he leaves his cloak behind and he knows that there's going to be consequences. But he wasn't willing to compromise his reverence and his love for God in that moment. Joseph continues in the face of repeated temptation to be a man of integrity. He continues to be a person who loves and honors the Lord. And so this leads me, again, if you don't know the story, you're coming into it, surely God's going to honor him. Surely Potiphar's wife is going to be found out and Joseph will be vindicated. Luke, would you read verses 13 to 20?
And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he had brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. As soon as he heard me, and that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. Then she laid up his garment beside her until his master came home, and she told him the same story, saying, The Hebrew servant whom you brought among us came into me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, This is the way your servant treated me, his anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison."
Potiphar's wife lies. She accuses Joseph of attempted rape, and Joseph is sent to prison. And the Lord was with Joseph. Really? Really? Is this what it means to be with Joseph? As you dig deeper, though, you come to see that in ancient Egypt, attempted rape was resulted in capital punishment, especially if you were a slave and the victim is a government official's wife. So why is Joseph alive? Again, do you notice that in verse 19 that Potiphar burned with anger? But towards who? If it was towards Joseph, then why is Joseph still breathing? And I believe it's because Potiphar knew the character of Joseph. And I think he knew the character of his wife. And so his anger burned against his wife, not Joseph. He knew Joseph was a man of integrity and faithfulness. He was furious that now, to save face, he must remove this man who had brought so much good, so much blessing to his household. And so instead of execution, he looks to spare Joseph's life, and has him imprisoned. The Lord was with Joseph. We're going to finish with these final verses where Luke, could you read 21 to 23?
But the Lord was with Joseph, and he showed him steadfast love, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were there in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it successful.
Joseph never stopped trusting. He never stopped trusting God, even after being betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, being faced with and having to deny temptation day after day, only to then be falsely accused and imprisoned. Joseph trusted that the Lord was with him, not because his circumstances told him so. He didn't have the advantage that we have of reading about it. He trusted in the promises of God and pressed deeper into the one who has drawn near, who is with us. He remembered the dreams of future rule, and he committed himself to being a vessel for blessing. Even at great personal cost, he remained loyal to God rather than yielding to temptation. Little known to him, as we will see, that this was preparing him for what is to come. I want to invite the band up now as we're going to sing, but I just want to, as we do, Joseph clung to what was unseen in place of what was seen. Perhaps today, as we worship in song now, there are areas in your life where you are clinging to what you can see. There is a fear of letting it go, because letting it go means trusting in God in the unknown, and it's something that you can't control. It's beyond what you can manufacture, what you can curate. And perhaps this clinging to what is seen has driven you to compromise your values, your beliefs, your integrity, your faithfulness to God. Perhaps there is a temptation in your life that you're aware of, that actually you need to find that exit. You know the exit. You need to run through it. And so as we sing, again, one of the things we want to do is open up space for prayer. Open up space for us to intercede on behalf of one another, but also for you to turn to the people next to you and to ask for prayer, or for you to come forward and to be prayed for. But I just want to encourage you that today, don't leave without prayer. Don't leave without having experienced a moment where you come before God, a God who sees you, who knows you, who loves you, and is with you. Let's spend some time now where we can pray.